Probably one of the most common topics to come up within our community, in my DMs, in response to emails, whatever it might be, is around perfectionism in parenting. And I know that this topic really resonates with me because as a parent and as someone who has done a lot of work around my relationship to myself and the coping mechanism of perfectionism, I thought that I was doing really well. And I was like, yeah, perfectionism like really isn't, a challenge for me, a struggle for me anymore. Really left that in the past. And then I became a parent and so much of that resurfaced at a new level, at a new depth. It was a whole new opportunity for healing for me as a parent around perfectionism. And today's conversation is going to be all about this. And I am so honored to have my wonderful friend, Shelly Robinson, here with us to talk about perfectionism in parenting. Shelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Simi. I am so glad to be here. And I love this topic. I love that we're going to talk about this today.
I am so grateful. For anyone who does not know Shelly, which many of you probably do, she is both a certified conscious parenting coach and certified family wellness coach who helps parents worldwide break generational cycles to fill their homes with more compassion, calm, and joy. She is the founder of Raising Yourself, the creator of the Connected Kid Toolkit, which I absolutely love. Our family actually absolutely loves it, and the community builder of 400,000 besties across all of her social media platforms. She's been featured on numerous podcasts and TV interviews by platforms such as Good News LA, Go Zen, Raised Good, and Mind Valley. When she's not cheering on parents to become more deeply connected with their kids, you can find her in the kitchen baking with her two children, sneaking in a game of ping pong with her husband, or releasing stress at her weekly boxing class. She's also a coffee enthusiast, which we know I appreciate, a neuro spicy mama who believes firmly in the power of Taco Tuesdays no matter what. And you can learn so much more about Shelly, all the incredible work that she's up to by visiting her website, shellyrobinson.com, and snagging her transformational free 10-day guide entitled The Ultimate Guide to Less Yelling and More Compassion, which we all need. I'm so excited to have you here, Shelly. And I think that I also want to note your handle on Instagram. Well, one, because anyone who's not following you is going to want to follow you, but also because of what it is, raising yourself. And one of my favorite things about you and your approach to parenting is that it has such a focus on the need for parenting ourselves and for the healing work that so many of us crave and need for our inner children. And it's so beautiful how you are approaching parenting in this way. It's really revolutionary.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll tell you, it took me a really long time to understand that. I didn't have my first child 13 years ago and think, gosh, I sure do need to reparent myself. It took a lot of pain and frustration and overwhelm to finally kind of arrive at that conclusion. Like after having so many of my own adult tantrums, I was like, hey, there's something I need to be working on deeper than just kind of the, you know, death grip on the steering wheel, trying not to yell, relying on my willpower. Like it goes deeper than that. But it took me a really long time to understand that. So I'm just sharing that because if that's kind of where you are in your journey, that's exactly where you need to be. And I hope this conversation just really normalizes that.
Well, it's already doing that because something that you just shared, I think, is going to be very relieving for so many people listening, which is the fact that you just said when you had your first child 13 years ago, you had not already done all of this reparenting work within yourself. You were not ready and like 100% to be the parent who you are today, right? You didn't have all of the skills. You didn't have all of the tools in your toolkit. And you didn't hit the ground running day one of parenthood in this way. And I didn't either. And I think for me, what has brought up so much pain for me in parenthood is learning these tools and these skills, doing some of this deeper reparenting work that I didn't even realize I had to do because I thought I had already done it.
Right.
And then reflecting back on the early days and feeling like, oh my gosh, I wish I had known then what I know now, or I wish I had had those tools or those skills then that I have now. And I think that something that is so important is forgiving ourselves, maybe for things that we did in the past that we have since learned that we want to do differently. And I think this is such a big part of most people's parenting journeys.
Right. Yeah. I think that's such a good point. And I think when I think about, gosh, I wish I would have done things differently 13, 12, 11 years ago. I couldn't have because it was those very conflicts that I needed to be a part of to kind of unearth that the wounds that I needed to heal. Right. And so many people say, well, gosh, I don't want to have kids until I've healed all my wounds. And on the one hand, I absolutely applaud that. Like, I love that people are trying to get a head start on this work. But on the other hand, we can't completely know what our wounds are until our beautiful, wise, dysregulated children bring them to the surface, just by existing. And that's
Yes.
work, right? Like, they're not doing it on purpose to like make us mad, right? And I say that all the time in my community that no one, they're not coming at us with any malice. They're just being who they are. And it's up to us to decide how our reactions or our responses reflect the work that we need to do inside. And it's humbling. And I say every time I get on a podcast or anytime anyone says, what do you think about when you think about parenting or reparenting yourself? And the one word that comes to mind is humility,
Yes.
you know?
Yes, absolutely. I would love to read the question that came in from one of our listeners that we're going to be diving into in today's episode. And I think that humility will be a core theme in the conversation around this. She writes in, I've overcome perfectionism as it relates to food, body, and movement. But where I'm seeing it crop up in my life now is motherhood. I have two toddlers, and I often find myself striving to be the best mom ever. From being a pro at handling tantrums to designing age appropriate activities to nailing what to feed a picky eater. How can I feel more at ease with how I'm doing motherhood and all of its ups and downs?
Hmm. I love that question. Thank you for reading that. So the first thing that comes to mind when I hear that, what I would invite that person to get a little bit curious about, because I've had to ask myself this question, is what does it mean to you to make a mistake? Because that's something we learned decades ago. Whether our parents wired in a positive association with that or maybe a negative one, it was wired in, or maybe it was wired in within a school system or, any other institution where children exist. We began to make meaning at a really young age about what it meant to make a mistake. And in order to unlearn that when it comes to raising kids, we have to be able to link that and say, gosh, when I make a mistake, and this is all probably unconscious, right? So our job is to kind of like, we're kicking up this emotional dirt and it's hard. So we've got to be really gentle with ourselves. But when I make a mistake, at some point I learned that I'm putting this in quotes, bad. I'm naughty. Maybe that resulted in me, my parents withdrawing affection. Maybe I was punished, but the odds are there was a negative association with making mistake. And so as adults, thankfully, and you know this, like our brains are neuroplastic. And so they have the ability to change, which is amazing. It takes time, right? But we can start relearning and rewiring a new narrative into our brain about what it means to make mistakes as a parent. So it's an opportunity to say, well, gosh, what would I tell my child if they made a mistake? It just means you're still learning. or it means there's an opportunity to grow. And so it's where this is also interconnected, right? Like we want to tell our children that, but we struggle to tell ourselves that, right? We say, oh my gosh, honey, it's okay that you fell off the bike or that you spilled the milk, but then you burned dinner and you're like, what an idiot. What is wrong with me? Why can't I get anything right? Or, you yell at your kid, gosh, I'm never going to change. So we're trying to link up how we want to speak to our children with how we speak to ourselves.
I had a child therapist tell me who we were working with. She shared that one great way to reduce anxiety in kids around perfectionism, right, is to let them witness you making mistakes and
Yeah.
verbally process out loud the mistake that you made and how you're going to move forward through it. And so she
Yeah.
said, she's like, it doesn't have to be, a really big mistake. It can be little things. You could be making eggs in the morning. And even if you have to make up a mistake, right? Like where you're practicing
Yeah.
this, like create these opportunities. You
Yes.
crack an egg and you say, oops, I made a mistake. Some of the shell of the egg just dropped down in there. What could I
Yeah.
do? Oh, I'm going to go get a spoon and dig it out. Everything's going to work out okay.
Yeah.
Mistakes happen. And literally bring kids into your own process where they're able to see that happening. And I thought that was so helpful, where it's
Mhm.
not just about how we're talking to kids about their
Yeah.
mistakes, but it's also how we're showing them that we process our own. And then I
Yes.
think the bigger mistakes for me, the mistakes that feel bigger for me, I'm sure everyone has their own baggage around different
Yeah.
things or, different things that feel loaded or triggering for them. But for me, when I interact with my kid in a way that I'm not proud of, so
Mhm.
I'm trying to stay calm, trying to stay present, I'm trying to stay regulated. And
Yeah.
then I get to a place where I get short
Yeah.
or I get snippy. And I'm not, per- I'm not saying this is better or worse. I'm not personally someone who yells, but
Mhm.
I get really short and snippy. And so that's how I respond in those moments. And I'll get like that with them, get really frustrated. And then afterwards, I think, wow, I really wish that I had handled that differently.
Yeah.
And it's been really healing for me to be able to acknowledge that it's helpful for them when I do that and then apologize and acknowledge like how I
Yeah.
did that wrong and show them that in relationships things don't have to always be perfect,
Right.
but we can repair through that. And I think being able to see those things as character building and giving them a different and maybe even healthier lens on relationships for later on in life, that can be really powerful and has helped me to take a little bit of the pressure off of myself to
Yeah.
always get it right because I can't.
Right. Right. And when you take that pressure off of yourself, often it's the pressure that leads to our mistakes, right? It's
Mhm.
to be relaxed in a relationship when we're putting this really like attainable pressure on ourselves. That's the very thing that causes us to kind of be short and snippy and yell. It's that pressure. But I would love to share a story about me making a mistake. It wasn't a parenting mistake per se, but I want to share with your community how our kids are always watching and listening. So I was hanging up, I'm looking at all of your artwork behind you, Simi, and it made me think of this. I have a wall in our kitchen and I was hanging all my daughter's artwork up in there. And I wanted to put it in pretty black frames. I mean, they were paper, so I was taping them up there in a way that I thought wasn't going to leave any marks. And we had to take it down one day. That did not happen. I accidentally used this not so safe wall tape. It said it was safe, but it wasn't. And as I was putting the frames up there, I just had this bad feeling that this tape didn't belong on the wall. So I started peeling it back a little bit and I was like, oh my goodness, the drywall started ripping off. And
Oh my goodness.
I was home by myself that day and I was just enjoying this time and I was just like relaxing. And then all of a sudden I noticed I was doing this. And what first came up for me with shame. I noticed right away, I was like, gosh, what an idiot to myself. And I know
Mhm.
that's not productive, but I caught myself, and that's the difference. And I think it's important to note that you don't necessarily always eradicate that inner critic, but you catch it a lot sooner, and you can replace it with something else like, well, gosh, it did say well safe, and you weren't doing this on purpose. And it was, you didn't plan for this to happen. So anyway, I had probably already hung a dozen pictures, and my kids came home and saw it. And I was like, I can't believe I did that. And I was normally I don't do this to myself in front of them, but in that moment, I felt so bad about it. And I was so frustrated. I was kind of like down on myself. And I said, I cannot believe I did that. Like, I wasn't paying attention or something. I was kind of speaking down to myself. And my 13-year-old son, who I've been modeling this in front of for probably a decade now, he like put his little hand on my shoulder, and he was like, Mom, you're allowed to make mistakes. Like, it's okay. And I literally almost burst into tears, because it's not his job to reassure me. First of all, I just want to say that. But I think he's old enough, and he's heard that from me enough now, that it was kind of his turn to reassure me that, like, yeah, we make mistakes, and no one's upset with you. And it's just really cool how it comes full circle, and they can, offer us that and know that it is okay to make a mistake, and that we're creating a culture of just celebrating when we fail in our family.
One of the most beautiful things about that moment that you just shared to me is that he believes that.
Yeah.
He believes it is okay to make mistakes, and you can tell that that is deeply rooted in his belief system because of the work that you've done within yourself and because of what you've modeled to him. And I
Mhm.
think that that's such an amazing thing when you see your child independently expressing something that hoped that they would internalize and that you've worked to help them internalize, and then to see that play out in real time is so beautiful.
It really is. And, it can apply to something as non-dramatic. That moment felt a little dramatic for me, but when my kids are working on schoolwork, or they're learning to, figure out a new skill, I'm always saying to them, you literally cannot learn without making a mistake. And it would be really boring if you weren't, fumbling a little bit. There would be no challenge. So we're always trying to find that like Goldilocks, just right amount of challenge, whether that's in school or building their communication skills or conflict resolution. But learning those new things is going to come with mistakes. So all of the parents out there who are trying to create these new patterns in their own families, or who are breaking cycles, like, if we're reflecting on our mistakes and repairing with our kids when we make them, that's truly part of the equation. You cannot get through this work and through this parenting journey without messing up a little bit. And no one's
Absolutely.
doing it right. No one is doing it right perfectly.
Yes. You mentioned, unattainable expectations. If, as parents, like we may have unattainable expectations or unrealistic expectations. When I think about the listener's question and I think about, that kind of side by side with unattainable expectations or
Yeah.
unrealistic expectations, how would someone or how would you
Mhm.
figure out if the expectations that you have for yourself are unrealistic or realistic? Or is it your perspective like, well, we just, expectations in general are not helpful? Or is there a way that they can be
Yeah.
helpful? Because I think about in this question when she's talking about, okay, I want to be like a pro at handling tantrums, and I want to design these age appropriate activities, and I want to be able to like really nail feeding a picky eater. And I'm
Right.
sure every parent, like I'm sort of out of the toddler phase now, but I have I've got my own list of things that skills that I am actively working on building so
Mhm.
that I can be the best supporter of my children and really help them to thrive.
Yeah.
How do we reflect on if those things are realistic versus unrealistic, or what is it like to have, like a healthy relationship with expectations from your perspective?
Yeah, gosh, that's such a good question. And I think when I hear that question, I feel compelled to zoom out a little bit. And again, I end up asking a lot of questions before we answer these, which is, what does it mean to this person to be able to do those things? Are you then feeling worthy? Like you've nailed the picky eater eating and you've figured out the perfect activities, and I'm putting perfect in quotes. Are you then what? What's the end game, right? Are you like, then I'm worthy, then I'm finding emotional safety, then I'm enough? And so what we have to do as parents is back way out and say, this is, and we're building this foundation. So if we're like thinking about our family or ourselves as a garden, this is like the soil. This is what matters the most, is to know like deep in your heart that you are worthy, whether you do any of that stuff or not. You are enough, whether you do any of that stuff or not. And so to me, it's less about like, am I checking these boxes of things that I really want to do that I think means I'm a really good parent? Or am I just staying aligned to my values and constantly offering myself self-compassion when I steer out of direction a little bit? So to me, it's more about values alignment, because as our kids grow, those things about what we think it means to be a good parent are going to change, right? It's more about, are we sticking to our values? Are we staying authentic, and are we repairing when we're outside of those things?
Yeah, I love I love that. I love the values alignment piece. And I also think that I'm reflecting on something you shared about with your kids, how as you're helping them to learn new skills,
Mhm.
there's an awareness that being challenged and making mistakes is part of the learning process.
Right.
And when I think about unhealthy or unrealistic expectations, it's typically me wanting to check a box perfectly
Mhm.
rather than me really wanting to be in the learning process. And
Yes.
so with parenting, I've really had to shift my mindset from this is this is a box that I need to check perfectly, whatever it might be at any of the different phases of
Yeah.
parenting. And I feel like at this point now I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. I'm like, wow, it's wild to think I've been a parent for 7 years. Like we've gone
Yeah.
through a lot of different phases.
Sure.
And rather than feeling like I need to check this box perfectly and do this perfectly, and I want this to be some sort of like badge of honor that I am a good mom,
Yes.
boiling it down more to like, what is the skill that I'm trying to develop here? And when I
Mhm.
think about developing any skill outside of parenting, because if there's if parenting is feeling really important, then I always think it's charged, right? Just like
Yeah.
when I was working on releasing perfectionism around food, my relationship with food felt really charged. There was a lot going on there. And sometimes it helped to have examples that were non-food examples that I could look
Yeah.
at unemotionally and be like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense there." And I think about if I'm trying to build the skill of like speaking a new language,
Yeah.
I'm going to expect that I'm going to be confused sometimes. I'm going to say it wrong sometimes. I'm going to have like a headache from overthinking sometimes, like that there's going to be those challenges along the way. And that's to be expected. How else
Right.
am I going to learn how to speak this other language? And so I think getting into that growth mindset with some of these parenting things, and from my perspective, that's only possible when you remind yourself, like, there are no perfect parents. Take the pressure off to be a perfect parent because
Right.
in our house, we went through in the last year, we went through a diagnosis process for ADHD, and number one, incredibly liberating to just have a deeper understanding for my
Yeah.
kiddo and to say, now we know how to move forward and how to build the right tools. And like, we know that we need to do some things differently.
Right.
And I also felt like I was drinking from a fire hose
Yeah.
because this for me was where the perfectionism in parenting really showed up, because I just had this urgency that there is no time. I need
Mm.
to figure this out now. And I need to do this right now because my kid is counting on me.
Yeah.
And, we're their advocates and we're the ones who are really like driving the process for them as children. And I felt like I was suffocating
Mm.
between the pressure to want to know it all and do it all perfectly and the feeling that there was no time to learn.
Mhm.
And it just felt like, like the walls were closing in.
Yeah.
And I really had to do some of my own work around it's okay if you don't know it all right now. And if you can't do it all perfectly, there is time to figure this out, and that is part of the process. And I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that with parenting where you it feels like there isn't a runway to learn because you just wanna get it right for your kids, like, right there in the moment.
Right. Right. I think what you're bringing up, what comes to mind for me is that emergency feeling that you're describing is usually linked to things when they feel performative, right? Like when we've got to check the box versus that intrinsic, like, I'm going to stay true to my values. I'm going to trust the process. I'm going to take this slow. I'm going to trust my child. Like that's all like that inside work, right? And when it starts to become performative, like I'm going to check this box of making sure I have all the information, it's kind of that scarcity mindset, right? If I don't have all the information and if I don't understand this within 48 hours, then then you start catastrophizing, right? And that's when we're kind of extrinsically motivated, which means we're doing it for like other people. And maybe in this case, it wasn't for other people, but it was like this box you were checking, like if I consume all the knowledge and I understand this within this really wild time frame, then it's that if then I'm a good mom. But you were already a good mom and you were already capable. And so if we can remove that like kind of performance feeling, and I had that a lot around food too. Like if I stayed under this many calories during a day, and if I exercised enough, then I'm good enough, right? Then I'm skinny enough, or whatever thoughts I was having back when I was unlearning all of my food issues. So, a lot of that applies to parenting as well. It's like we got to do it's the inside work. How do we feel about this on the inside? Are we feeling good about it? Are we staying true to our values? Are we giving ourselves grace? Then you are on the right track. And there's no perfect formula for that. And that's what's overwhelming about parenting is because it looks a little bit different for each of us because we do all have slightly different values. But if we can stay in alignment with those, then that's really what keeps us grounded and keeps us heading forward and not worrying about what other people think about how we're parenting.
Yes, to the intrinsic versus, like, external
Mm.
experiences there, and you shared something that I think is so powerful, which is, when we're not worried about what other people think about our parenting and we can really connect inward, trust ourselves, trust our child. And I am confident that so many people listening are thinking, but it's really hard when I feel like people around me are judging me or maybe are judging my kid.
Right.
And I think to the point that you made earlier around what is this really about? Like feeling safe, feeling
Yeah.
worthy, feeling loved. We may have those, deep desires slash wounds in ourselves, but I think it's also really common to project those onto our children too, right? Where it's like, I
Right.
want them to feel safe. I want them to feel loved. I want them to feel like they are enough. And so all of a sudden, I'm thinking about them through the lens of how other people are experiencing them. And I
Mhm.
want to try to control how other people are experiencing them because I want to protect them
Right.
from judgment or rejection or whatever it is that we're,
Yeah.
as adults feel really afraid of. And how how do you how do you love to support people that you work with, or how do you process through this, within yourself,
Mhm.
letting go of the fear of judgment from other people, or maybe not letting go of the fear, but
Yeah.
just dealing with it or processing through it, like what are the ways that you found that can be really helpful for that? Because I also think that that's a big part of how the perfectionism comes up, is this fear
Sure.
of what other people will think. And I know that you talk about that so much and in such beautiful ways.
Yeah, I get it, first of all. I mean, the judgment and the adult, gaze at our parenting and at our children if they're doing things that other adults don't expect them to be doing or think they should be doing really used to hurt my feelings and make me feel very defensive. But since I've done this work and since I've been just really, connecting with the younger version of myself, my inner child, I now know that when people are judging me, it's just a reflection of how much they judge themselves. And that doesn't mean
Yes.
it doesn't mean the sting goes away completely. And I'm guilty of it. I'm not, I'm far from perfect. So do I catch myself judging other people or even judging my own children? Sure. And then immediately though, that's the difference. I catch myself and oh, by the way, that day I have been just berating myself all day. I've been extra judgmental about myself for whatever reason. And so the way I see other people, and even when I get really rude comments on my posts and, really judgmental or unkind comments, I used to get really defensive about that. But now I just am like, that's really a reflection on the person and how much they're judging themselves. And that's not my problem to solve.
You
And
just start responding to every one of those comments with a mirror emoji.
yeah, like, or, like, here's an invitation to connect with little you. And I don't mean that, like, I truly, really, but it takes time to get to that realization, like, gosh, how I am seeing and perceiving other people is really a reflection of how I see and perceive myself. And so that's why we have to make it a priority to make sure we're ensuring that our children feel safe and validated about who they are. Not and as long as we're not worrying about what other people think, they're not going to worry about what other people think. They pick up on the energy. We don't even have to say it out loud. They know, like, if we're in a grocery store and they're melting down and we're unruffled and we're like, we've got this. This is normal. This is developmentally appropriate. I'm going to handle it. I'm not going to worry about the stares. They pick up on that sturdiness and that calm and that non-judgment from us, right? And they know it's okay to be human.
They are so good at tuning into the energy. It is wild.
It
It is
is.
so amazing. And
Mhm.
it has given me so much respect for my younger self, because as someone who relates with the terminology like highly sensitive, I think about how as a little kid, I felt so sensitive to
Mhm.
energy around me, and like I could really feel it as if it was
Yeah.
my own. And because of that, developed like hypervigilance
Yes.
and anxious behaviors, because I constantly felt like just a sponge
Yeah.
for everything around me. And now
Mhm.
seeing my children be so sensitive or just picking up on little
Mhm.
things. Like this morning, I looked at something on my phone, and with everyone was getting ready for school, I thought they were in the other room. Tim was doing, shoes and jackets, and I looked at something on my phone and I just took a deep breath. And all of a sudden, Yazzie pops her head around the corner and she goes, "What's going on, mama?"
Right,
I
right.
said, "I'm just taking a deep breath. I'm just calming my body." And she was
Yeah,
like, "Oh, okay."
I love that, and I love that you're just normalizing, like, "I had a big feeling, and here's what I did about it," instead of saying, "Nothing, don't worry about it." You know what I mean?
Right.
Because kids are on the receiving end of that, like, it's none of your business, like, and so you just normalized it and said, "I had a big feeling, and I took a deep breath."
And I will also say about the nothing, don't worry about it, or everything's fine. I think when you are a child who is attuned to energy, which
Yes.
many of the adults listening to this are probably like, yes, that was me. And I
Mhm.
think probably true of most kids, but I don't know. If
Yeah.
you were a child who was attuned to energy and you sensed something was going on, and then you constantly heard nothing is going on, it creates this feeling of am I losing my mind?
Neat.
Can I trust myself, or can I trust what I'm sensing? Is this real or imagined? And I think that it creates a disconnect, and not that everything is age appropriate for kids to understand,
Sure. Yeah.
but I think to be able to say, like, I'm calming my body, I'm taking a deep breath. You know,
Right.
we're having a conversation and we're figuring something out.
Yeah.
Sometimes adults do that. Like, things
Right.
like that where you can find age appropriate ways to share those things with kids. I think it helps kids to know what I'm sensing or what I'm feeling. Like I can trust my body, and I can trust what I'm feeling, and I can trust what I'm sensing in ways that feel like supportive and age appropriate.
Right. And I think by doing that, we are helping them to adopt at such a young age healthy coping mechanisms for those hard feelings. Because I know for me, like you growing up, everything was just this barrage of just like feeling all the things and noticing everyone's energy and not knowing what to do with that. And so later in life, as I grew up, I started adopting unhealthy ways to cope with that, right? Including
Yes.
food and other things. And so it was too much. And of course, back then, I thought those unhealthy ways of coping with all my feelings made me a bad person, right? Like made me a bad kid. But really, it made me a sensitive kid who didn't have any other tools. I didn't have access or knowledge of any other tools that I could have used to deal with all the big feelings I always felt as a sensitive kid. And so I think it's so important to normalize that as parents, we're not robots and we're not happy all the time. And when we're not happy and when we're frustrated and overwhelmed, what are we doing to get back to baseline, right? We're saying it out loud. We're naming the feeling like, gosh, I'm frustrated right now. And then what are we going to do about it? I'm going to go sit in my chair and like meditate. I'm going to go for a walk instead of, doing what I used to do, which was numbing my feelings with whatever was, readily available to me.
Yeah.
So it's such an important thing to wire into them. And, your story about, your kiddo picking up on your energy, like I had a bit of a fiasco with my toolkit, like some cards came and they were incorrect. And I was like a little overwhelmed and upset. And I didn't mean to do this. It's amazing what we do as parents. It like we turn into like our little 5-year-old selves. I was kind of stomping around the kitchen, like muttering to myself. And my son, like 2 rooms over, was like, Mom, what's going on? He's like, are you okay? And just like you said, they just know. And of course, I was like, I'm sorry. I didn't even realize I was like, he's like, are you stomping? But it was like, but I want him to always just feel like he can say, what is going on with you? And I will say, I'm frustrated and here's why. And in this case, it was a perfectly age appropriate thing to share with him. He asked me how he could help. And then, I went for a walk and that was it. Instead of just brushing him off and saying nothing or it's none of your business, it's just that constant, like, modeling what it looks like to be a human. And it also gives our kids permission to be grumpy and, you know, overwhelmed. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense that you would feel like that because this happened. And it's just making sense of ourselves and helping them to make sense of their selves so they don't feel so alone in their feelings.
Absolutely. That's so beautiful. You mentioned the importance, obviously, of reparenting yourself and connecting with the younger version of yourself. What are
Yeah.
some of your favorite ways to like connect with that inner child, with that younger version of yourself? Do you have like practices that you do, or what does that look like for you?
So I love connecting with little me in ways that brought me joy when I was a little kid. And so for me, those two big things are music and movement. So if I'm moving my body and I'm listening to my favorite tunes, I feel 5 again. And
Mhm.
that's like how I find my true essence. And that's when I feel most at home in my body. So that's one way. Another way though is when I do make mistakes and when I do you know, mess up as a parent, little me comes up and the shame comes up, and I'll tell you like with that, the drywall that I ruined and that I'm in the process of repairing, or for instance, not long ago, I had a library book that was late. It was really late. And I got an email from the library saying, um, we're gonna like revoke your account. And it felt a little threatening to me. And like little Shelly, felt really ashamed of that. Like I was in trouble, and I'm still unlearning that. I feel like I'm in trouble a lot. And so it's in those little micro moments every single day that you say to little you, it's okay. You're allowed to make a mistake. You didn't do it on purpose, and you can repair this. And it's just so it can be just those daily little practices when that shame and inner critic creeps up based on what you learned about making mistakes as a kid. And you can kind of picture this in your mind, like your, current self as a parent talks to little you as if she's right there with you, and you're reassuring her inside that it's okay, and that you're telling her the things that she needed to hear back then. And that's where that rewiring in your brain happens, and you do it over and over again. And eventually you get to have a new script up there.
It's really powerful to think about what follows from that, small moment of rewiring as well. So to think about, opening the email, seeing I'm like, I can picture the email because I've totally gotten one from the library.
Yeah.
You see that email about the book that's like way overdue, where I'm like, I don't ever even remember that book coming to our house, but we're gonna have to do some deep digging to find it. You see that email, you have that feeling of, oh no, I did something wrong and I'm going to get in trouble. And
Mhm.
you feel that shame. And if you go down the path of berating yourself and, beating yourself up and saying, like, you are bad, you did something bad, and you think about how that spirals and how that builds and the energy that that creates and the way you feel in your body when that's the internal experience that you're having. Like, I know for me, it will almost feel like my skin's electric, it's like you can
Yeah.
sense that.
Yeah.
And then your kid walks through the door and your internal experience impacts the interaction that you have with them, even if you don't intend it
Yes.
to. Or you open up that email and you have that thought of like, I did something wrong. I'm getting in trouble. I feel the shame. And you're like, wait a second. I'm going to take this moment to reparent myself. And I'm
Right.
going to bring in this truth, this
Yeah.
reality that I didn't mean to make a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. It's okay to make a mistake and we can repair this. And it's a totally different experience that you have in your mind, in your body, in your energy. And then you move forward through your day with that. And then your kid walks through the door and you meet them in a really different way. And I just think it's so powerful to think about the ripple effects
Yes.
that these small moments of offering our self-compassion can have. Like, it just cannot be understated, and we're not gonna do it perfectly, it's not gonna happen all the time, but also, when it doesn't happen perfectly, we have another chance to do the reparent thing and to do the repair thing, and it's just I think it's so amazing to see how it all compounds
Right.
in a positive way.
Right, right. And I always say, I feel like what you said was so beautiful. And like when I really have to distill it down to like a sentence, just to keep, sometimes I like having really handy little affirmations in my mind when I'm about to lose it. And one of the things I think about is like we cannot be gentle with our kids when we are at war with ourselves. It just doesn't work. So it's about giving ourselves what we needed when we were younger. That's not to say our parents did a horrible job, right? Like multiple things can be true at once. They could have done a really great job in a lot of ways, and in a couple of ways, we have a couple of wounds that we have to heal. But we have to give ourselves what we needed when we're younger, so that we can extend that to our kids. And another thing I hear a lot about in my community, and that I experience when it comes to reparenting yourself, is using your voice, which we often are afraid to do as perfectionists, because what if we say the wrong thing? What if we do the wrong thing? And I think for me, if you didn't have much of a voice as a child, meaning your opinion didn't matter, you were never allowed to give input, you couldn't offer a different point of view with your parents, then as an adult, when your child does that, like God forbid, they back talk or they disagree with you, that trigger is like it's so hard, because little you comes to the surface and says, I wasn't allowed to do that. Who do you think you are, back talking me, or sassing me or disagreeing with me. And so in those moments, again, you have to pause, and it can be really quick because when you're interacting with your kid, you can't have a whole session, right? It's like you're reassuring little you, like, you deserve that too. You deserve that. Your kid's allowed to do this. This is appropriate and this is mutually respectful. And you should have had that too.
Oh,
And
I
so,
love that. You should have had that too. That's
yeah, and
such a beautiful thing to offer.
it's true. And I think so many of us are afraid to use our voices because our voices were met with shame or oppression. And so how do we repair that? How do we reparent ourselves if we were raised that way? And part of it is disagreeing with someone you might disagree with, laying down a boundary, using your voice to change the world. I mean, even when I started my Raising Yourself page, that for me was a way I reparented myself because I started using my voice, and it was scary, and I didn't always use it perfectly. And I still don't use it perfectly, but it's been healing. It's been a really healing opportunity for me. And it's because every time I post something, I say my voice matters, and
Abs-
everyone's voice matters in my community, and they should have had that too.
Absolutely. Everything you share really is so healing. What do
Yeah.
you feel like has been your favorite part of parenting so far? Now that you are on, this continual path of reparenting yourself, like what's your favorite part of parenting, or what are your favorite parts of parenting?
Gosh, I love witnessing my kids' wisdom. They're so wise. And I think I appreciate that so much more now because 13 years ago, when I had my first kid, I thought I was the really wise one. Honestly, like, I was very much leading with ego and thinking about how much wisdom I would impart and what I was going to teach them. And I'm not saying I haven't taught them nothing, but it was really very focused on like what I was going to pass down to them. And now, 13 years later, I'm kind of sitting back saying, gosh, they're good teachers. I had no idea what was in store for me. It's making me teary eyed because it feels like magic. Like, I learn so many things from them every day, and I feel like they're my little life coaches. They're constantly shining lights on things that I'm like, gosh, I have a little bit of a lesson to learn here. And I couldn't have come to that realization without them just being who they are. So it's just really getting to witness that every day.
It really is like a little bit of magic. And thank you so much for everything that you do to help all of the parents get to experience a little bit more of that, like their version of that magic with their kiddos. It's truly changing the world. And I just appreciate you so much.
Thank you.